Let me describe what a ADX Florence looks like, because it's not like any prison you've seen in movies. Imagine a building designed by someone who studied every prison escape in history and said, "Never again." The prison sits on 37 acres of empty land. Around it, layers of fences topped with razor wire. Between the fences, laser beams that detect movement. Pressure pads buried in the ground that feel footsteps. 12 gun towers watching every angle. Inside, the hallways are empty, silent. Everything is controlled by machines. There are 1,400 remotely controlled steel doors. That means no guard ever has to open a door manually. No inmate ever sees a key. The cells are 7 feet wide and 12 feet long. Smaller than your bedroom, probably. The walls are solid concrete, soundproof. So thick that even if you screamed with all your strength, the person in the next cell wouldn't hear you. Each cell has a bed made of poured concrete, a concrete desk, a concrete stool. Everything is attached to the floor. Nothing can be moved. Nothing can be used as a weapon. There's a toilet and a shower. But here's something weird. The shower is on a timer. It turns off automatically. You don't control it. The only window is 4 inches wide. It's angled in a strange way so you can see a tiny slice of sky, but never the ground, never another building, never another person. Why would they design it like that? Because they don't want you to remember what the outside world looks like. One former inmate described it like this: "It's like being buried alive, except you're still breathing." Now, you might be thinking, okay, but who actually lives there? It must be the worst of the worst, right? You'd be correct, but the list of names might surprise you. Some you've definitely heard of: the Boston Marathon bomber, the Unabomber, the master spy who sold America's secrets to Russia for 22 years, the shoe bomber who tried to blow up a plane with explosives hidden in his sneakers, and until recently, the world's most famous drug lord, El Chapo. But here's what most people don't know. ADX Florence isn't just for terrorists and cartel leaders. It's also for prisoners who caused too much trouble at other prisons. Men who killed guards. Men who organized gangs from their cells. Men who escaped or tried to escape from other maximum security facilities. In other words, these are people who prove that regular prisons can't hold them. So the government built a prison that doesn't give them a chance. But at what cost? Let me tell you about a typical day at ADX Florence, because this is where things get really disturbing. You wake up in your cell, alone. A slot in your door opens. A tray slides through. Breakfast, you eat. The slot closes. You wait. For hours, there's nothing. No TV. No books unless you've earned that privilege, which takes years. No cellmate to talk to. No windows to look through properly. Just you, 4 concrete walls, and silence so complete you can hear your own heartbeat. Around midday, the slot opens again. Lunch appears. You eat. It closes. More waiting? If you're lucky, and only if you've behaved perfectly, you might get 1 hour of recreation time. But don't imagine a basketball court with other prisoners. No, recreation at ADX Florence means they move you from your 7 by 12-foot cell to a slightly larger concrete room, still alone, still surrounded by walls. The only difference? This room might have a pull-up bar. Then it's back to your cell. Dinner through the slot. More silence, 23 hours a day like this. Every day. For years. Sometimes for decades. No physical contact with other humans except during cell searches or medical emergencies. And even then, you're in handcuffs and leg chains. One psychologist who studied the prison said something chilling. Human beings are social creatures. When you remove all social contact, the brain starts to break down. It's not designed to function in complete isolation. And if you think this sounds intense, make sure you're subscribed, because what I'm about to reveal next is even more shocking. Drop a comment if you've ever felt truly alone. Here's where the mystery deepens. In 2012, a group of inmates filed a lawsuit. It was called Cunningham versus the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Their claim? that ADX Florence was driving them insane. Literally, they said the isolation was so extreme, so damaging that it counted as torture under international law. The lawsuit revealed some disturbing details. Inmates were cutting themselves, smashing their heads against walls, eating parts of their own bodies, having conversations with people who weren't there. At least 8 or 9 prisoners had killed themselves since the prison opened. One inmate tried to cut off his own finger. Another ate the flesh from his arm. These weren't weak people. These were hardened criminals. Men who had survived gang wars, prison riots, cartel violence, and ADX Florence broke them. The government's response? These inmates are mentally ill. That's why they're acting this way. But the inmates' lawyers asked a troubling question. Were they mentally ill before they came to ADX Florence, or did the prison make them that way? The lawsuit dragged on for 4 years. In 2016, there was a settlement. The details were kept mostly private, but the government agreed to review how mentally ill prisoners were treated at ADX Florence. They agreed to transfer some inmates to psychiatric facilities. They agreed to make small changes. But here's what they didn't agree to do: close the prison or end the isolation. ADX Florence is still operating today. Right now, as you watch this, over 300 men are sitting in those concrete cells, alone. Now let me tell you about something even more secretive. Hidden inside ADX Florence is a special unit. It's called Range 13. Only 4 cells. This is where they put the absolute most dangerous people on Earth. The ones they believe could organize terrorist attacks even from inside a supermax prison. What makes Range 13 different? Special administrative measures. The government calls them SAMs for short. Here's what that means. If you're under SAMs, you almost can't communicate with the outside world at all. 1 phone call per month to family, maybe, if approved. All mail is read by the FBI before you receive it. All letters you send are copied and analyzed. You allow your visits? Monitored. Recorded. Sometimes the government listens to conversations that are supposed to be private. No newspapers. No TV news. No radio. No way to know what's happening in the world. Why such extreme measures? The government says it's because these inmates could pass coded messages to terrorist networks outside. They could coordinate attacks. They could radicalize other prisoners. But human rights groups say this crosses a line. Amnesty International investigated ADX Florence in 2014. Their conclusion? The conditions violate international human rights standards. They called it cruel and inhumane treatment. The United Nations sent experts to investigate. They raised concerns about torture, but nothing changed. The prison is still there. The isolation continues. And here's the most chilling part. Since ADX Florence opened in 1994, not a single person has ever escaped. Not one. Think about that for a moment. But why has no one escaped? Is it really just the security measures? The laser beams, the pressure pads, the 12-gun towers? Or is it something else? Let me tell you what former guards have said about working at ADX Florence. Their stories reveal something darker than just concrete and steel. One guard described it like this: after a few months you start to feel it too. The silence. The emptiness. It gets inside your head. Some guards quit after just a year because they can't handle the atmosphere. Another said, you're watching men slowly disappear. Not physically, they're still there, but something inside them dies. You can see it in their eyes. Think about that. Even the people who get to leave at the end of their shift feel the prison changing them. Now imagine spending 20, 30, 40 years inside. Let me tell you about Thomas Silverstein. You probably haven't heard his name, but his story explains why ADX Florence exists. In the 1970s and 80s, Silverstein was one of the most dangerous prisoners in America. He was serving life for armed robbery. While in prison, he killed a rival gang member. Then he killed another inmate. Then, in 1983, he killed a prison guard named Merle Klutz, one of the 2 murders I mentioned earlier that changed everything. After that, the government didn't know what to do with him. They couldn't execute him because some states had abolished the death penalty. They couldn't keep him in regular maximum security because he'd already proven he could kill there. So they did something unusual. They put him in complete isolation. Not at ADX Florence, it didn't exist yet, but at another prison in conditions similar to what ADX would later become. Thomas Silverstein spent the last 36 years of his life almost completely alone. No contact with other inmates. Barely any contact with guards. Just him and four walls. He died in 2019 at age 67. By the end, people who saw him said he seemed more like a ghost than a man. His story became the blueprint. The government looked at what happened to Silverstein and thought, this works. Let's build an entire prison like this. And they did. But here's where things get really interesting. Remember El Chapo? The Mexican drug lord who was captured and sent to ADX Florence? Before he arrived at ADX, El Chapo was famous for one thing, escaping from prisons. In 2001, he escaped from a Mexican maximum security prison by hiding in a laundry cart. He remained free for 13 years, running one of the most powerful drug cartels in history. In 2015, Mexican authorities finally caught him again. And then, just 1 year later, he escaped again. This time, his cartel had built a tunnel. Not just any tunnel, a tunnel that was almost a mile long, with lighting, ventilation, and a motorcycle on rails to move through it. The tunnel went from outside the prison directly into the shower of El Chapo's cell. He literally walked into his shower and disappeared underground. When he was finally captured again in 2016, the United States government made a decision. He could never go to a regular prison, not even a maximum security one, because El Chapo had proven something terrifying. If you have enough money and enough loyal people, you can escape from anywhere. Anywhere except one place. In 2019, El Chapo was sentenced to life in prison and sent to ADX Florence. Do you know what happened next? Nothing. No escape attempts. No tunnels, no laundry carts. No elaborate plans. Some people say it's because ADX Florence is truly escape-proof. But others say something different. They say the isolation breaks your spirit before you can even think about escaping. That the prison doesn't just hold your body, it traps your mind. Now, let me tell you about something they call H-Unit. This is a special wing inside ADX Florence, separate from the main prison. It's specifically for terrorists and people accused of threatening national security. The conditions in H-Unit are even more extreme than the rest of ADX Florence. Why? Because these aren't just violent criminals. These are people the government believes could inspire others to commit acts of terrorism, even from behind bars. In H-Unit, almost everything is monitored. Your mail, your phone calls, your visits with family, even conversations with your lawyer might be recorded. In 2013, something disturbing happened in H-Unit. Several inmates went on a hunger strike. They were protesting the conditions, saying the isolation was unbearable and violated their human rights. The government's response? They force-fed them. Think about what that means. Strapping someone down and forcing a tube down their throat to make them eat. The inmates' lawyers argued this was torture. The government argued it was necessary to keep the prisoners alive. But here's the question nobody could answer. If the conditions are so bad that people would rather starve themselves to death than continue living there, should the prison exist at all? If this documentary is opening your eyes to things you never knew, hit that subscribe button and comment below with what surprises you most so far. You won't believe what's coming next. But here's what's strange. Despite all these reports, despite lawsuits, despite criticism from human rights groups around the world, nothing really changed. The prison is still there, operating the same way, with the same rules. Why? The government's answer is simple. These are the most dangerous people in the world. We have to keep society safe, and that's true. The people at ADX Florence have done terrible things. Bombings, mass murders, espionage, drug trafficking that destroyed countless lives. But here's the uncomfortable question. Even if someone has done terrible things, is it okay to treat them this way? Where's the line between justice and revenge? Between security and cruelty? Let me tell you about the step-down program. This is ADX Florence's answer to critics who say the isolation is too extreme. The idea is simple. If you behave well, you can gradually earn more privileges. Maybe a book, maybe a radio. Eventually, if you're really good for years and years, you might even be transferred to a less restrictive prison. Sounds reasonable, right? But here's the problem. The program takes years, sometimes decades. And remember, these inmates are already in extreme isolation. Their mental health is deteriorating. Studies show that people in solitary confinement have trouble thinking clearly, making decisions, or controlling their emotions. So the government is asking people whose minds are breaking to prove they're mentally stable enough to earn basic human contact. It's like telling someone who's drowning to swim better before you'll throw them a life preserver. Some inmates do make it through the program. They get transferred to regular prisons. They eventually rebuild some connection to humanity. But many don't. Many get stuck in a cycle. The isolation makes them unstable. The instability gets them in trouble. Getting in trouble keeps them in isolation. Forever. Here's something most people don't know. ADX Florence has a nickname among prisoners in the federal system. They call it the Tomb. Not the Rock like Alcatraz. Not the big house. The Tomb. Because once you go in, part of you never comes out. Even if you're eventually transferred or released, which is rare, former inmates say, you're never the same. One man who spent several years at ADX Florence and was later moved to a regular prison said this: "I'd rather do 20 years in a normal prison than 5 years at ADX. At least in a normal prison, you're still human. At ADX, they turn you into something else." Another former inmate described nightmares that continued for years after his release. He said he still wakes up sometimes thinking he's back in that 7x12 concrete cell, listening to nothing but silence. The psychological scars, experts say, might never heal. So what's the truth about ADX Florence? Is it a necessary evil? The only way to contain people who have proven they can't be contained anywhere else? Or is it something darker? A place where the government crosses lines that shouldn't be crossed, even in the name of security? Here's what we know for certain. ADX Florence is real. It's operating right now in Colorado, holding over 300 inmates in conditions that most people can't even imagine. The inmates there have done terrible things, things that hurt innocent people, things that justify punishment. But the punishment at ADX Florence isn't just imprisonment. It's something more. It's the systematic removal of almost everything that makes us human. Contact, communication, community, hope. Some people say that's justice. Others say it's torture. The truth might be somewhere in between. Or maybe the truth is this: we built a prison so extreme that it forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about who we are as a society. What are we willing to do in the name of safety? How do we punish people who've committed unforgivable crimes? And when we lock someone in a concrete box for 23 hours a day for years or decades, are we protecting society? Or are we becoming something we shouldn't be? ADX Florence has no easy answers. It's a place built on fear of what these inmates might do if they had any freedom at all. But it's also a place that creates fear of what happens when punishment becomes something we can't look at without flinching. Since it opened in 1994, ADX Florence has held some of the most dangerous people ever born: terrorists, spies, mass murderers, crime lords, and it has held them perfectly. Not a single escape, not a single successful attack coordinated from inside. By that measure, it works. But at what cost to the inmates' minds, to their humanity? And at what cost to us as a society that built it, funds it, and allows it to continue? These are questions without simple answers. But they're questions worth asking, because somewhere in Colorado right now, hundreds of men sit in concrete cells the size of parking spaces, alone, in silence. Some of them will die there. and the rest of us will probably never think about them again. Unless, of course, you watch this documentary. Now you know. Now you've seen inside the tomb.